settle in once more, and let me take you back to that age of fire and shadow, back to Terra, where the greatest siege in human history was about to begin, back to the walls of the Imperial Palace, where the fate of a species hung upon the courage of those who would not yield. This is the story of the siege's first days, of the lost and the damned who threw themselves against the golden walls, of the defenders who stood against the tide, and of a desperate mission on the conquered moon that would shape the future of humanity's warriors. On the 13th day of Secundus, the bombardment of Terra began. Picture it, if you will. A world that had been humanity's cradle since the first ape climbed down from the trees. A world that had seen empires rise and fall, civilizations bloom and wither, wars beyond counting wash across its scarred surface. A world that had endured through the age of strife, when warp storms cut humanity off from itself and madness ruled the stars. Now that world lay under siege. The sky above Terra had become an ocean of ships. Thousands upon thousands of them crowded every orbit, so dense that their running lights created a false firmament, a galaxy of hatred burning where stars should have been. The great armada of Horus Lupercal had arrived at last, and with it came the promise of ending. For weeks, the defenders had watched that armada gather. They had seen the outer system fall, Pluto conquered, Uranus overrun, Mars betrayed from within, Luna claimed after desperate fighting. Each loss had been a wound, each retreat a bitter medicine. But through it all, the defenders had held to a single truth: Terra would not fall. The palace would not break. The Emperor would not be defeated. Now the moment of truth had arrived. The enemy aimed the first shell deliberately at the center of the inner palace, at the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor's own quarters. It screamed a song of fire as it tore apart the atmosphere over the Himalayan mountains, falling through the furious storm of anti-ship cannonades and defense laser beams coming up from the Imperial defenses. Its flight was short, being cut apart by a net of las beams as soon as it was detected. But it was seen. 3 Primarchs stood upon the ramparts of the Pab Bastion and watched that shell's brief descent. Rogel Dawn, the Praetorian, his armor of gold gleaming in the light of distant fires, his face as severe as stone. Sanguinius, the great angel, his white wings folded against his back, beautiful beyond measure yet carrying a shadow of sorrow in his eyes. And Jagatai Khan, the warhawk, leaning against the battlements with the studied casualness of a hunter at rest, his expression hovering between hunger and melancholy. Midnight, as the old reckoning has it, said the Khan, watching the shell's destruction. The symbolic spearcast. Our brother marks his enmity for us. It is a challenge, a promise of his victory. Such arrogance, said Sanguinius softly. Horus was well gifted with confidence, the Khan replied with a shrug. It has grown wayward. He is too sure of himself. Arrogance is close kin to hubris. He will fail because of it. Dawn turned his gaze to the Warmaster's armada. Not since the Principia Imperialis had mustered at the opening of the Great Crusade had such a fleet of void ships gathered over Terra, and never before had so many come as enemies. Thousands upon thousands of ships crowded every orbit, so many that their lights outcompeted the stars and sun and turned night and day into a single, ceaseless murk of red warglow. "Why do you wait?" Dawn said quietly, the question voiced more to himself than his brothers. "Come to us. Break yourself upon our walls." "He waits no more," said Sanguinius, his voice strained with prescience. "It begins." The sky sparkled 1,000,000,000 times as every ship in the enemy fleet spoke together. "The Emperor will fall," the pattern of light seemed to say. "We have come to wreak ruin." "Every war I have ever seen has hidden beauty," said the Khan. "But I have seen few sights quite so entrancing as this." "A fleeting beauty," said Dawn, "and deadly." "All things are fleeting," the Khan replied, and there was something almost wistful in his voice. "Life is short and full of woe. One must wring every moment dry and drink in the experience it has to offer, good or bad." Sanguinius turned to look at him, his perfect features touched with something like confusion. "How can you see the good in this?" "Joy is an act of defiance," said the Khan. "With joy, we win, even if we lose. To have lived well is a victory all its own, for we all die. Death is unimportant to the laughing warrior. A poet makes tragedy glorious. That is why." It was a philosophy born on the steppes of Chagoris, where life was hard and death came swiftly, where the only thing a warrior could truly own was the manner of his living. Sanguinius, with his curse of foresight, his knowledge of his own doom, could not share such acceptance. And Dawn, who had built his entire existence around walls and fortifications and things that endured, he could not understand how one could find peace in impermanence. The shells hit the main shields seconds after striking the void aegis. The great protective dome, wrought with ancient Martian knowledge, reacted and roofed the earth with fire. Storms of flame shot out complex tangles of discharged lightning. Beyond the aegis protection, the ground bucked. Towers of nuclear fire roared skywards from every horizon. Tremors shook the world. "We will not fall," Dawn said with utmost certainty. "We will stand." And so the siege began in earnest, thousands of kilometers away, in the cold and windswept heights of the Altai wastes. Other eyes watched the skies. Two figures crouched on a mountainside overlooking a mining town crammed with conscripts rounded up for the final levies. These were no ordinary soldiers of either side. They were operatives of the Alpha Legion, that most secretive of brotherhoods, whose true allegiance remained a mystery even to themselves. Ms. Madra lowered her magnoculars and watched the first shell fall. Beside her, Ashul lay with his sniper las pressed to his eye, scanning the crowds below. "Is that the signal?" he asked. "It is as good as any," she replied. "We have to be quick. Altai is a long way from southern Himalaya." Ashul was a veteran, cynical in the way only those who have seen too much death can become. "Our luck has to run out sooner or later," he said. "Our orders keep coming, but the assets dwindle. Now the end." He waved toward the rising false dawn of the bombardment. "This is the last run for us. We'll get caught, or we'll die in the crossfire." "Do you care about dying?" Ms. Madra asked. He wished she hadn't put it so baldly. "I do care. I thought I wouldn't, but death in the abstract is a friendlier fellow than death in the flesh, and he's breathing down my neck right now." "We'll make a difference," she said. "What are our orders even?" "Free reign, havoc. We'll find something." The Alpha Legion had told her, as they told all their operatives, that they fought for the Emperor. She had heard those words a dozen times from warriors who claimed the name Alfarius, who worked for the War Master's cause while speaking of the Emperor's service. Perhaps they all were Alfarius. There were stranger things in the universe now than a legion of clones. Maybe she was being foolish, but she chose to believe it. She remembered the night she had been recruited, though she could not recall exactly when it had been. Time was a human construct, a convenient fiction that dissolved when examined too closely. She had been living in the back end of nowhere, on a planet that was itself at the back end of the galaxy, scratching out a living and drinking heavily, trying to get as far from humanity as possible. One night she had returned to her hab module to find a stranger waiting for her. Not just any stranger, a warrior of the Legions Astartes, perched incongruously on one of her rickety chairs, his bulk making the furniture look like a child's toy. "Lydia Ms. Madra," he had stated. It was not a question. She had her gun in her hand before he could blink. That seemed to entertain him. "Shoot me if you like," he had said. "If you do, you will never know why you came home to find me in your hovel." "Who are you?" "I am Alfarius, the 20th Primarch." "Don't be ridiculous. Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant. It is how you will address me." She still didn't know if it had been true. So many of the Legion looked like their gene sire that it was impossible to tell. But he had offered her something she had not had in years purpose, a cause worth fighting for, even if she could never be certain what that cause truly was. For the Emperor, whatever that meant anymore. Now she and Ashul moved through the chaos of the siege, slipping through the lines like ghosts, gathering intelligence and sowing confusion wherever they went. They had killed a dozen commissars, sabotaged ammunition stores, spread rumors that undermined morale on both sides, small acts of havoc that added up to something larger. They didn't know if it mattered. They didn't know if anything they did would change the outcome of the war. But they kept fighting anyway, because that was what the Legion had taught them to do. Fight without hope of recognition, fight without certainty of purpose, fight because fighting was all that remained. Below the palace walls, across the vast expanse of the outworks that stretched before the daylight wall, the lost and the damned were gathering. They came in their millions, conscripts and cultists, mutants and abhumans, the dispossessed and the devoted. They were the expendable masses of Horus's grand army, thrown against the defenses not to break them but to bleed them, to exhaust ammunition and courage, to force the defenders to spend themselves before the true assault began. Among them was a creature named Asmedi. He had been born human, or nearly so. The beastkin were a rejected branch of humanity's tree, too changed by mutation to be accepted, too human to be exterminated. They lived lives of abject misery on the fringes of civilization, despised by the Imperium that promised peace and advancement for all mankind except for those it didn't. Now Asmedi crouched in a herd ship descending through Terra's burning atmosphere, his mind already dissolving under the influence of combat stims flooding his veins. The apostles' voice never stopped as they fell through the air towards the ground, words of dark promise that meant nothing to Asmedi now. Gas flooded the transport hold, bitter chemicals that scoured away the last of his reason. The ship slammed down hard. Ramps blew from their mountings, the explosives that tore them free, slaying a score of the beastkin too close to the doors. They needed no encouragement to charge. Asmedi understood nothing now. His thoughts were a single sheet of red. With the rest of his kin, he hurled himself from the ship, falling 5 meters to the ground. He stumbled but did not fall, and rushed away into the storm of fire and destruction. The pounding of the guns could not frighten him, only quicken the racing of his heart. His feet were arranged like a beast's, with powerful haunches and elongated bones, giving the beastkin great speed. They outpaced the pure men and the mutants pouring from their own landing craft. Asmedi ran with the wind, his mane flowing behind him, his swollen tongue lolling from foam-flecked jaws. At 300 meters, the defenders opened fire. Beastkin to the right and left of Asmedi fell bleating, tumbling madly, such was their speed. A burning shaft of light branded his shoulder, filling his flared nostrils with the smell of singed hair and his own roasted flesh. He barely felt it. He gathered himself as he approached the rampart, his abhuman legs bunching to hurl him over in a leap no standard human could match. He came down atop a terrified man, his simple maul, a threaded bar with a nut the size of a fist screwed onto the end, already swinging. In that moment, lifting his head to the sky, Asmedi roared and roared until the self-hate he had carried all his life was all spat out, and murder took its place. The defenders watched the first section of the outworks breach from the relative safety of the Helios Gate. Raldoron, first captain of the Blood Angels, stood beside Maximus Thane of the Imperial Fists, observing the slaughter with grim professionalism. "I have never seen a battle like this," said Thane. "They fight without care for themselves." "I do not believe there has ever been a battle like this," said Raldoron. Above the Aegis, fighters duelled, numerous as enraged wasps. The bombardment thundered into the energy shield, but as yet it was holding. Out on the plain, countless ships were setting down under heavy fire. More than half were brought crashing to the earth before they landed. None of them came down undamaged. "None of our traitorous brothers show themselves," Thane observed. "Horus has a multitude of expendable mortals. This is sickening work, all the more so because we must wait here, while the men and women we were made to protect sell themselves alone. We must remain here. This attack is a ploy," said Raldoron. "That worries me. The War Master would not launch such an attack if there was not a way through. We know the shields are not perfect. There are flaws. Perturabo works for the War Master. If anyone can find a gap in the defense, it will be him." They watched in silence as the waves continued to break against the walls, each wave leaving behind a tide mark of corpses, each wave reaching a little closer to the ramparts. Far from Terra, beyond the moon's cold grey face, another battle was being fought. One that would shape the future of the Legiones Astartes themselves. The strike cruiser Sisypheum limped through the void above the burning orb of Jupiter, its hull scored and blackened by the scars of a dozen desperate engagements. Once it had been a proud vessel of the Imperial Fists, named by the Emperor himself in the days before the betrayal. But those days were long past. Now it belonged to survivors, warriors of shattered legions who had banded together to continue the fight against the War Master. The crew was as varied as it was small. Ulrach Branthan, the captain, had been an iron hand before the massacre at Istvan V reduced his body to ruins. Now, he was something else entirely, a nightmarish fusion of flesh and machinery, kept alive by the ancient relic known as the Heart of Iron that beat within his exposed chest. The device had been cannibalized from a fallen dreadnought and grafted into his body by desperate hands. It kept him alive, but it had not kept him sane. His thirst for vengeance had become something terrible. Sabik Wayland was the ship's Iron Father, a tech adept of the 10th Legion who had spliced himself into the Sisypheum's control systems. He flew the ship not with hands-on controls, but with thoughts pushed through neuroproxy devices, feeling the vessel's wounds as if they were his own. Freighter Thematica, an iron wrought of the Averni, tended the ship's temperamental reactors, coaxing power from systems that had been damaged beyond any reasonable hope of function. His devotion to the machine spirits that animated the vessel bordered on the religious. Ateshtasa was a salamander, an apothecary who had kept them all alive through years of running battles. His green armor was scarred by fire and blade, and his voice carried the rasp of one who had breathed too much smoke, but his hands remained steady and his knowledge of Legion biology unmatched. And there was Nikona Shirokin. On its bridge, Shirokin of the Raven Guard manned the surveyor station, watching the chaos of the Jovian engagement volume unfold around them. 367 ships maneuvered aggressively within the battle space, escorts and destroyers mostly, but at least 70 vessels of capital displacement. Dying ships blazed in Jupiter's high orbit, skeletons of blackened metal alight from within. Shirakin had given much thought to how a warrior should die. As a neophyte, he had imagined his end would come in a terrible war against some hideous xenoform, fighting side by side with his brothers for a noble and heroic cause. But war cares nothing for the arrogant imaginings of young men. Its teachings are bloody and indifferent. He knew now he would die in the dark, alone and unremembered. A fitting end for a warrior of the Raven Guard. Tumbling lunar-class dead ahead, he shouted as a gutted warship emerged from the static. Sabik Wayland, the Iron Father, spliced into the ship's helm controls, threw the Sisypheum into a hard, rolling turn. The modified strike cruiser shuddered, its hull plates buckling and bulkheads groaning in protest. The massive wreck passed so close Shirokin felt he could reach the other ship's bridge in one powered leap. "Didn't even come close," said Wayland, pulling out of the turn. The battle continued around them, a maelstrom of destruction that defied comprehension. The loyalist defenders of the outer system were dying by the thousands, but they were buying time. Every minute the War Master's forces spent here was a minute Terra had to prepare. Then the Carnager found them. It came knifing through the void at the perfect kill angle, murder torpedoes already loose, stabbing lasers stripping away the last of the Sisypheum's shields. The ship screamed its name across the Vox, tearing through security protocols with the visceral trauma of daemonic spite. "Carnager! Carnager! Carnager!" White-hot beams of light seared through the strike cruiser's many decks, the relative movement of the two vessels causing them to whipsaw through its reinforced superstructure. Hundreds of meters of hull plate peeled away like meat pared from the bone by a butcher's knife. The world turned inside out. Red light turned to white, and Shirokin felt certain he was about to discover firsthand how a warrior should die. But the universe had other plans. A massive spike in warp spectra erupted somewhere near the Comet Shrine, similar to what one might expect when a war fleet translates, but many orders of magnitude larger. The War Master had done something thought impossible. He had opened a rift in reality itself, deep within the solar system, allowing his fleets to sail directly into Terra's orbit. The shockwave of that translation caught the wounded Sisypheum and hurled it across the void, depositing it in the Transmartian Gulf, far from the battle, far from any hope of immediate rescue. "We're alone out here," Shirokin reported, struggling to make sense of the surveyors. "No ship signatures or engine flares in the void." "Then we find somewhere to repair," said Ulrak Branthan, the ship's captain, if that nightmare of fused flesh and machinery could still be called a man. His body was a biomechanical horror wrought by desperate measures, kept alive by the ancient relic known as the Heart of Iron that beat within his exposed chest. An old way station, an abandoned graving yard. There must be relics of the first push from Terra drifting out here. It took Shirokin 25 hours to locate such a place, an ancient coaling station, a hollow cavern of iron with only rudimentary docking facilities. In the earliest days of warships traversing the oceans of old Earth, such places were known as coaling stations, ports that allowed navies to extend the range and influence of their fleets. This structure had served the same purpose for the first monitor ships patrolling the inner system gulfs. The nameless station was cold and dark, anchored in the void and all but invisible to any sensors that might come looking. It had hung here for centuries, perhaps millennia, forgotten by an Imperium that had outgrown such modest facilities. Its interior reeked of congealed promethium and the scabbed residue of volatile engine plasma. But it was the names that captured Shirakin's attention. The walls of the station were covered in carvings, names of ships and crews, dates and dedications, simple epithets and complex memorials, tens of thousands of them, layered over each other until many were unreadable, a palimpsest of humanity's early conquest of the void. Black Joke, Divine Lip, Dexterous Gladiator, Bittersweet Reunion. The names sounded absurdly quaint to Shirakin's ear, relics of an age when the stakes had seemed smaller, when the enemy had been distant and cold rather than brother turned against brother. But the courage etched into these walls was no less real for being ancient. He ran his fingers over the carvings, feeling the roughness where knives and chisels had scored the metal. He pictured a crewman in a bulky vac suit, likely dying of radiation poisoning as he cut into the wall with the tip of a drill bit to secure his little piece of immortality. Centuries separated Shirakin from that long-dead pioneer. But in that moment, alone at the edge of the dark, he felt a powerful connection passed down through the ages. Their stories had never been told. Their courage had gone unrecorded, save for these walls. But someone had remembered them, at least for a while. While the Iron Hands and their monotask servitors labored to repair the Sisypheum, Shirakin roamed the cavernous halls of the coaling station. The darkness within was absolute, a place where light went to die, so all-encompassing that it took him back to his training with the Shadow Masters, where he had lived for 2 years without light or vision. The darkness did not trouble him. He had made it part of himself long ago. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived through the Kryptos, a captured enemy machine that could decipher the traitor's communications. A single phrase in the brutal language of Chthonian Abathan. It meant the cutting of a rival gang leader's throat, all the way back to the spine. The Lunar Wolves had adopted it to signal the successful conclusion of a campaign. Luna had fallen. The moon was in enemy hands. But there was more. A desperate plea from a Selena gene witch named Talab Vita 37, begging for anyone, to help protect or destroy something called the Magna Mater. Atesh Tarsa, the Salamander's apothecary who had kept them all alive through years of running battles, knew what those words meant. He was bound by oaths of secrecy learned during his training on Luna, but now he chose to break them. "I am a proud son of Nocturne," he began, his voice rough with the weight of what he was about to reveal. "Born and raised in the shade of Mount Deathfire, my first breath was ashes and smoke, my first sight a sky filled with flame, and my first grip was upon a smiting hammer. My word is my bond, and every oath I have sworn remains unbroken." He paused, gathering himself. Every apothecary is inducted into certain mysteries during their training, secret knowledge birthed deep in Luna's vaults. To reveal the moon's secrets, even to my battle-sworn brothers, would be to break a gravely sworn oath. In this moment, I choose to break that oath. The burden of that will be mine to bear until my death. The others waited in silence, understanding the weight of what he was giving them. "The Selenar's rites are shrouded in metaphor and symbolism," he explained. "Broadly speaking, their cults believe each individual life is but the sum total of genetic archetypes that have endured throughout human history. Like most faiths, they are heavily factionalized, and each cult venerates the helical mysteries of our species in different ways." "We've wiped out cultures for less," muttered Ignatius Newman. "Indeed we have. But the Selenar had 2 things the Emperor needed: a knowledge of genecraft that outstripped his own, and industrial-scale facilities to match the scope of his ambition. Thus they were spared obliteration. The Emperor yoked Luna's cults and tasked them with building armies mighty enough to conquer a galaxy." He spoke of the earliest days of the Imperium, when the Emperor had first come to Luna with his armies of Thunder Warriors. The Selenar had resisted, desperately futilely. In the end, they had bent the knee rather than face extinction. But they had never truly surrendered. They had hidden their deepest secrets, preserved their most precious knowledge, waiting for a day when they might need it again. At the heart of their most secret mysteries lies the Magna Mater, the Great Mother. During my time on Luna, it was little more than a myth, said to be the fabled fountainhead of the earliest and most powerful space marine genetics. I never believed it ever truly existed, more that it was likely an allegorical representation of their vast knowledge. But what if it does exist? What if it is something tangible? What if it is the very source code of the Space Marines? The implications settled over them like a shroud. "You're saying it's the source code of the Space Marines?" asked Cadmus Tyro, the acting captain. "I never believed it truly existed. But what if it does? What if it is the very source code of the legions? Imagine that power in the hands of the traitors. The implications settled over them like a shroud. If the War Master gained access to the genetic templates of the Primarchs themselves, he could create warriors to rival the legions. He could corrupt the very essence of what it meant to be a Space Marine. They had no choice. Wounded and outnumbered, the crew of the Sisypheum set course for Luna. Back on Terra, the siege was entering its next phase. On the 7th day of Quartus, the Death Guard arrived. But before we speak of the Death Guard, let us speak of those who would face them. Let us speak of Katsuhiro. He had been a third-grade enumerator for the 86th Nihon Nutrient Complex. His days had consisted of counting shipments, filing reports, ensuring that the endless flow of processed foodstuffs reached the billions of mouths that depended upon them. It was not a glamorous life, but it was a life, and he had been content. The conscription had come without warning. Officials in grey uniforms had appeared at his hab block, reading names from lists, herding people onto transport ships like livestock. He had protested, had shown them his certification as a nutritional enumerator, had insisted that his work was essential to the war effort. They had not cared. They had shoved him into a cargo hold with hundreds of others and sent him to the outworks. The journey had been a nightmare of cramped spaces and panicked whispers. No one told them what was happening. No one explained where they were going or what they would be expected to do. They were simply moved, like pieces on a regicide board, pushed into positions from which they could not escape. When he arrived at the outworks, they had given him a las gun, a kit bag he didn't know how to use, and pointed him toward the ramparts. A sergeant named Janan, an acting captain now, after every actual officer had been killed, had delivered what passed for orientation: "You're soldiers now. There are things expected of you. Shutting up is one of them." Katsuhiro had learned. He had learned to fire his weapon, to duck when shells fell, to ignore the screams of dying men so he could focus on staying alive himself. He had made something like friends among the conscripts, Dormek, a hard-eyed veteran who claimed to have been a bounty hunter, a thin man whose name he never learned, who never stopped talking about how they were all going to die, a woman with manicured nails and fighter's eyes who never spoke at all. They died around him, one by one. The shells didn't care about courage or cowardice. The las beams didn't discriminate between those who wanted to live and those who had given up. Death came randomly, absurdly, and Katsuhiro endured. He had discovered something in himself during those weeks of horror, not courage exactly, but a kind of stubbornness, a refusal to simply accept what was happening. If he was going to die, he would die fighting. If he was going to live, he would live with purpose. Now, on the 7th day of Quartus, he crouched on the ramparts of the second defense line and watched giants descend from the heavens. Drop pods punched through the burning sky like iron fists, their descent heralded by gas attacks that blanketed the outworks in choking poison. Katsuhiro, a conscript who had been a third-grade enumerator for a nutrient complex before the war found him, fumbled with his gas mask as the brown fog rolled in around him. He had learnt much in the weeks since his conscription. He had learned that the men beside him would die without warning and without fanfare. He had learned that courage and cowardice meant nothing when shells were falling. He had learned that the only thing that mattered was the next breath, the next moment, the next heartbeat. Now he crouched on the ramparts of the second defense line and watched giants descend from the heavens. The Death Guard were diseased things, their once white armor now stained with the colors of corruption greens and browns and the sickly yellow of suppurating wounds. They moved with terrible purpose, shrugging off wounds that would have killed ordinary men, their weapons trailing smoke and plague fire. Stand firm, servants of Terra. A blood angel in crimson armor stood among the conscripts, his bolter blazing. The Space Marines were the only things that kept the line from breaking entirely. But even demigods could not be everywhere at once. And then the Khan moved. Jagatai Khan had been called many things in his long life: the Warhawk, the Great Khan, Lord of the Talan Wind. He was a hunter born, a predator who could not be caged. Rogel Dawn had ordered the legions to hold the walls, to let the enemy spend themselves against the fortifications, but the Khan had never been one to follow orders that conflicted with his nature. On the morning of the 7th day, Admiral Sukhasan had taken tea with the Khan in her chambers at the Bab Bastion. She had helped devise the battle plans that governed the siege's defense, and she sensed the Warhawk's frustration with his brother's methods. "You have doubts about my brother's method of fighting this war," the Khan had said to her, not a question, but a statement, Sukassan had considered her response carefully. She understood the strategic necessity of ordered retreat and calculated sacrifice, but understanding did not make it easier to accept. The sirens sound outside, on and on, the Khan had continued, his expression darkening. At Actinus Hive, an hour ago, 10,000 people took their own lives. They sealed a zone of the hive and cut off their own air supply. The last message said they could hear wolves howling in their dreams. There are others, smaller incidents, but multiplying by the hour. He had spoken then of cages, of how his brother Dawn had only ever known duty and walls and things that constrained. He needs to be allowed the moment of flight before he returns to the cage of necessity, the Khan had said. Now the Khan was taking that flight. A storm of white shapes dropped precipitously off the wall and raced over the outworks toward the enemy siege camp. Land speeders, jet bikes, gunships and attack craft, over 1,000 warriors of the White Scars, all mounted, all crying out melodic Chagorian war songs. They moved as one, a flock of killing birds, their discipline perfect despite their apparent chaos. Sanguinius watched his brother roar past on an oversized jet cycle, tilting stubby wings in salute. He fights with such elegance, the angel said. He was ordered not to attack, observed Raldoron. He is the Khan of the Ordu of the White Scars Legion, the Warhawk of Chagoris. One might as well attempt to chain the wind. The White Scars flew lower than seemed possible, their contragrav sending up sprays of debris, their plasma jets heating the air into a dancing shimmer. They split into multiple flights at the edge of the Aegis, hugging the ground, dodging between the wrecks of ships and armored vehicles. Starbursts of shrapnel detonated among them. Swift lasers slashed out, but the mass flew on. In the Grand Borealis Strategium, Rogel Dawn watched the data streams with barely contained fury. My lord, the White Scars are making a sally. The Khan is leading them. Damn his impetuousness. Dawn summoned tactical overlays with sharp gestures. Get our fighters into the air. Prepare to aid my brother's retreat. If he plays his usual game, he will strike hard and make for the palace. Ensure he returns intact. My lord, if he doesn't. Then he is on his own. The Khan cut through the enemy siege camp like a blade through silk. His warriors destroyed gun emplacements and ammunition stores, killed crews and slaughtered sentries. They were ghosts of white and gold, there and gone before the enemy could respond. But the Death Guard were waiting. They emerged from the poison fog like nightmares given form, their corrupted bolters blazing, their plague knives gleaming with toxins that could kill even a Primarch. The Khan met them with his tulwar singing, cutting down traitors with every sweep, but there were so many of them, and their flesh would not yield. A blade found his knee. It was a simple combat knife, rusted and dull, but it exuded a sense of terrible peril. Black venom flooded the wound, and the Khan felt sorcerous sickness racing through his superhuman blood. He tore the blade free and kept fighting, but his movements were slowing, his vision blurring. The disease was spreading, corrupting him from within. Then golden light descended from the sky. Sanguinius landed among the Death Guard like a thunderbolt, his great wings spreading wide, his spear and sword moving in lethal harmony. He had seen his brother's peril from the walls and come without hesitation, without regard for his own safety. "Brother," the angel cried, "can you fly?" "My bike is destroyed," the Khan gasped, "but I have what we need." From the wreckage of his jet cycle, he had downloaded tactical data, the enemy's dispositions, their fleet positions, their command structure, intelligence that would save thousands of lives in the days to come. Together, the two Primarchs fought their way to a Thunderhawk descending through the chaos. Sanguinius stood on the ramp as it lifted off, loosing blasts from his marvelous spear to cover their escape. They were harried all the way back over the wall, where the combination of the Aegis and the defensive guns drove off their pursuers. Inside the gunship, the Khan examined the cursed blade that had wounded him. As they passed over the palace, the knife suddenly crumbled into dust, the venom boiling away, leaving nothing but a smear of drying blood. "Our father's doing, surely," the Khan said, marveling as the hilt collapsed into nothing. "His protection is strongest over the palace. The toxin, too, has gone from my blood. I feel his presence as a cool wind soothes a burn." "I cannot recall a time I did not feel troubled, my brother," Sanguinius replied, his wings twitching with premonition. They had survived, but the siege was only beginning. Above the palace walls, another kind of battle raged, one fought not with blades and bolters but with aircraft and missiles, with reaction times measured in fractions of seconds and margins of error measured in meters. Aisha Davenport, squadron mistress of the 198th Palace Aerial Defense Squadron, the Bright Hawks, yanked the control stick of her Panthera fighter hard to the left, sending Blue Zephyr into a bone-crushing curve. An enemy interceptor, a Giffon in the colors of the Death Guard, was on her tail, and she was running out of options. The battlesphere was a tempest of metal and fire. Fighters of dozens of different patterns duelled over the palace walls, while through the storm of flame and ships the drop pods of the traitors punched like iron fists. Aisha's mission was supposedly to destroy as many pods as she could before they touched down, but the enemy air armada made even approaching them impossible. Her wingman, Dandar Bey, had died minutes ago, his last words cut off mid-sentence as a Lascannon beam bisected his cockpit. Half her squadron lights were red on her display. Another blinked from green to mortis glow as she watched. She was on her own. The Chiffon pilot was good, inhumanly good, as one might expect from a legionary of the Adeptus Astartes. He was herding her, boxing her in with missiles and lasfire, driving her toward a kill zone from which there would be no escape. But Aisha had not survived this long by being predictable. She spotted her opportunity, a bridge ahead, grandiose and huge, typically Imperial, ablaze from end to end but still standing. She accelerated as fast as she dared, lessening her evasive movements to lure the Chiffon closer. Rockets stormed past her cockpit. Las light flashed by. The bridge burst from the smoke almost too suddenly for her to react. She pulled up to nearly vertical, making Blue Zephyr scream in machine pain. The Space Marine, for all his gifts, could not avoid the unexpected obstacle. The Chiffon slammed into the bridge and burst out the other side as a wingless stub in a shower of broken armor glass and masonry. Aisha took a breath, then another. She had done it. She had killed a legionary. Then her threat display lit up with 3 more contacts, vectoring in from 3 separate directions. From that position, there was no escape. Her fingers stretched out toward the pict glued to her instrument panel, an image of her husband, waiting for her somewhere in the underhives, probably wondering if she was still alive. They did not reach his face before Blue Zephyr was torn to flaming pieces. Such was the siege. Small heroisms and small tragedies multiplied 1,000,000 times across the face of a world, each death meaningful to someone, each sacrifice forgotten in the next moment's horror. The walls still held, but the price grew higher with every passing hour. On Luna, the crew of the Sisypheum prepared for their desperate mission. They approached the conquered moon from its dark side, their wounded ship hidden among the debris of destroyed defense platforms. The lunar surface was strewn with the wreckage of battle stations and ships whose orbits were decaying, shedding armor plates like bladed rain to the grey dust below. The Selenar cults fought hard, said Cadmus Tyro. The traitors paid a heavy price, as did the Imperium at its dawn, Wayland pointed out. Through passive surveyors, they detected scores of enemy vessels overhead. A Sons of Horus destroyer, the Chthonian Scion, held station above Herodotus Omega, the volcanic dome where the Magna Mater was hidden. They had 1 Storm Eagle remaining, barely enough warriors to crew it, and ammunition for perhaps 1 firefight, against an entire traitor garrison, against the Sons of Horus himself. But they had no choice. As the Storm Eagle detached and began its silent glide toward the lunar surface, Sharakin caught a glimpse of terror through the cockpit canopy. The throne world hung in the void, its atmosphere glowing with war storms, its surface mottled brown and steel dust grey. Even at bay, it's beautiful, said Wayland. I saw a painting once, Sharakin replied, of what Terra looked like when it was known as Earth. A blue-green orb, radiant with life and wonder. I wish I had known it when it had colour like that. But there was no time for regret. They had a world to save, or at least, to keep from falling entirely. The fighting in Herodotus Omega was brutal and close. The Sisypheum's warriors, Iron Hands and Raven Guard and Salamanders, united by shared loss and desperate purpose, fought through corridors never meant for war, past gene looms and cultivation vats, through chambers where the secrets of the Space Marines had been crafted for centuries. They found Talab Vita 37 in the deepest vault, surrounded by the bodies of her defenders. The Gene Witch was a multi-armed creature of chrome and flesh, Her form evolved through countless generations of deliberate genetic manipulation. She carried a case that pulsed with its own inner light. "The Magna Mater," she said, her voice like rustling parchment. "The source code of the Primarchs themselves. It must not fall into traitor hands." Getting out proved even harder than getting in. The sons of Horus had been alerted. Justerin Terminators in black and gold blocked every corridor, their combi bolters roaring, their power fists crackling with lethal energy. Shirokin fought as he had been trained to fight, from the shadows, striking and vanishing, his black-bladed gladius finding gaps in armor that should have been invulnerable. He killed and killed, but for every enemy that fell, 2 more took their place. In the end, it came down to a choice. The Storm Eagle was damaged. Its pilot, Wayland, reported that it could carry either the crew and the Magna Mater, or everyone and nothing at all. The weight was too much. Someone had to stay behind. Sharakin looked at his brothers, at Wayland, who had saved his life on Istvan at Tarsa, who had kept him breathing through a dozen campaigns at Tyro and Thematica and Newman, warriors who had become family in the crucible of war. He thought about how he had always known he would die in the dark, alone and unremembered, a fitting end for a warrior of the Raven Guard. The Shadow Masters had taught him that death was just another shadow to be embraced, another darkness to be made part of oneself. But this was different. This was not dying alone. This was dying so that others might live. This was giving his brothers a chance to complete the mission, to get the Magna Mater to Terra, to keep that precious genetic treasure out of the War Master's hands. "I'll hold them here," he said. "Get the Magna Mater to Terra." "Brother," Wayland began. "This is what I was made for. This is what a Raven Guard does. We strike from the shadows, and when the strike is complete, we vanish into darkness." Tarsa gripped his arm. "We could find another way." "There is no other way. You know it as well as I do." Sharakin pulled free and checked his weapons. His gladius was sharp. His bolt pistol was loaded. It would have to be enough. "From the darkness we strike, fast and lethal. And by the time our foes can react. Darkness there, and nothing more." Wayland finished, the old Raven Guard saying heavy on his tongue. Sharakin nodded. Then, before any of them could say anything else, he turned and walked back into the depths of Herodotus Omega. He didn't vanish. He fought. The Justerin found him in a connecting corridor, their black and gold armor gleaming in the emergency lighting. They were the elite of the elite, Horus's chosen warriors who had conquered worlds and broken armies. Against a single Raven Guard, they should have been overwhelming. They did not expect what met them. Sharakin had spent decades learning to fight from the shadows. He had trained under the Shadow Masters until darkness was as natural to him as breathing. He could move without sound, strike without warning, kill without being seen. And in the narrow corridors of the Selenar complex, those skills counted for everything. He killed the first Justerin before the others even knew he was there, a blade through the eye lens, driven home with all his strength. He was gone before the body hit the ground, melting into the shadows, repositioning for the next strike. The second died reaching for a weapon that would never fire. The third died trying to track a ghost that seemed to be everywhere at once. But there were too many of them, and Sharakin was only one warrior. They backed him into a dead-end corridor, their combi bolters blazing, their power fists crackling. He fought with blade and fist and the last reserves of his transhuman strength, cutting down 2 more before a bolt round finally found his chest. He fell. He rose. He fell again. When the end came, it came quietly. His wounds finally caught up with him, not just from the battle on Luna, but from years of fighting, years of pushing his body beyond its limits. He had been dying slowly since Istvan V. He had simply refused to acknowledge it. The Sisypheum found him later, after the enemy withdrew and the Storm Eagle reached safety. They carried him back to the nameless coaling station, back to that place of darkness and memory where the names of forgotten heroes covered the walls. He was still alive, barely, his body too broken to heal, his Susan membrane fighting to shut him down into a healing coma that might last centuries. Before the darkness took him, he had one last task to complete. With his gladius, working by touch alone in the absolute blackness, he carved names into the metal wall beside the other memorials. The names of everyone who had served on the Sisypheum, the names of warriors who had fought and died against the War Master's treachery: Ulrak Branthan, Cadmus Tyro, Sabik Wayland, Freyta Thematica, Atesh Tarsa, Ignatius Newman. The names of the dead and the living, side by side, united in their defiance of the darkness. And at the bottom, carved with the last of his strength, his own name Nikona Shirokin. The cyber eagle called Garuda settled on his shoulder as the Susan membrane finally claimed him. The bird spread its wings and froze in place, a silent sentinel that would watch over him in the ages to come. How best should a warrior die? In the dark, in silence, having given everything for his brothers. Shirokin's story had been told after all. Written in blood and iron, in a place called Sang Primus Portum, the name he found carved near the archway, half obscured by rust, a nameplate perhaps from a lost starship or a forgotten battle. It would serve. It would have to. The Sisypheum limped onward, carrying the Magna Mater toward Terra, the genetic treasure of the Primarchs themselves, kept from the War Master's hands by the sacrifice of a single warrior. One name added to the countless others on those ancient walls, one more hero who would never be forgotten. On Terra, the siege continued. Night Lords had been the first traitor Astartes to reach the walls. Their raptors, led by a creature called Lycoryphus, had used jump packs to soar over the defenses and claim a foothold on the ramparts themselves. For a brief, terrible moment, they held a section of the daylight wall. "We are first on the wall," Lycoryphus had cried in liquid Nostraman, raising his arms to the burning sky. The foothold was eliminated within hours. Blood Angels and Imperial fists counterattacked with ruthless efficiency, driving the Night Lords back over the walls or into oblivion. But the message had been sent. The walls were not inviolate. They could be reached. Then came Zardu Layak, the Crimson Apostle. He appeared above the battlefield on an island of bone, literally bone. The compressed skeletons of thousands of sacrifices fused together into a floating platform. 8,000 mortal priests in purple robes swayed upon its surface, their eyes cut out, their bodies scarred with ritual brands. "Hearken to me, O people of Terra." The word-bearer's voice bypassed ears and auditory systems to ring in the minds of everyone on the planet. "I am Zardu Layak, herald of the War Master Horus, rightful lord of mankind." The palace guns continued to fire, but every shot passed through the island as if it were smoke. It was a vision, a sorcerous projection, immune to physical harm. "I come with an offer to you all. Lay down your arms, renounce your false emperor, raise your voices to the War Master and plead for your lives, and you will be spared." He spoke of the emperor as a liar, as a tyrant seeking godhood. He spoke of the War Master as humanity's savior. He named the four dark gods Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slanesh, and the sky shook with each utterance, men crying out in terror at the mere sound of those forbidden names. "This is the end," Layak roared. "Grovel before the gods and beg for their mercy." The priests on the Bone Island lifted daggers to the sky and plunged them into their own hearts. Their blood poured through the gaps in the bone, falling toward the world below. And then the rain began. It fell across the entire palace, across battlefields and barracks, across conscript camps and command centers. Drops of rain that ran bright and crimson on yellow armor, on grey stone, on upturned faces. Blood rain. The sky itself wept red. On the vengeful spirit, far above the battle, Horus Lupercal sat upon his throne and dreamed. His body was a twisted thing now, swollen with the power of the dark gods, his features deformed into something that was more than human, but also somehow less. Warp light played around his head, streamers of red and blue and green and pink racing through the air like captive spirits. Ezekiel Abaddon, his first captain, watched his father with growing unease. Each time Horus fell into these trances, each time he communed with the powers in the warp, he came back different, diminished somehow despite his growing power. "He is not weakening," said Zardu Layak, who had materialized beside Abaddon as if from nothing. "His affinity with the warp grows by the hour. His powers swell." "He is the greatest being in this galaxy," Abaddon growled, "not the prophet of your so-called gods." "Is that so?" Layak's mask-covered face betrayed nothing. "The War Master has gone into the past. He seeks out the Emperor himself, in the time before his rise. He will learn our enemies' weaknesses and exploit them." Abaddon said nothing, but in his heart, doubt coiled like a serpent. He had helped bring this about, had heeded Erebus and the lodges, had embraced the rebellion when it seemed righteous. Now he wondered if they had simply traded one master for another, one tyranny for something far worse. That moment of reckoning would come. But not yet. Not while the war still hung in the balance. On the ramparts of the outworks, Katsuhiro survived another day. The second line was failing. Everyone knew it. The siege towers were grinding forward, vast constructs of dark metal and bound daemon spirits, their weapons pounding the defenses into rubble. The Ordo Reductor of the Dark Mechanicum was deploying engines of war that defied comprehension, walking fortresses and burrowing machines and things that existed in geometries the human eye could not process, but still the defenders held. Katsuhiro had found something unexpected in the horror of the siege, a reason to keep fighting, not for the Emperor, whom he had never seen, not for the Imperium, which had conscripted him against his will, but for the man beside him, and the woman behind him, and the child somewhere in the underhives who might live another day if the walls held another hour. Small reasons, human reasons, enough. A leaflet floated down from the sky, dropped by some loyalist aircraft making a desperate propaganda run. He picked it up and read the words printed beneath a poorly rendered image of a Primarch. "Lord Guilliman is coming. Stand firm and survive." "Lot of use, that," said the veteran Doromek, pulling Katsuhiro to his feet after an explosion knocked them both down. "If he gets here at all, we'll all be dead." "Maybe," Katsuhiro said, "but maybe not." He raised his lasgun and took aim at the next wave of enemies emerging from the smoke. And far from Terra, the Sisypheum limped toward the throne world, carrying within its wounded hull a prize beyond measure. The Magna Mater, the source code of the Primarchs themselves, would reach loyal hands. The enemy would not have it. One warrior's sacrifice had ensured that much. In the darkness of the coaling station, Sharakin's carved names waited to be found. Someday, perhaps, a stranger in a far distant age might discover them and wonder who these people were, what kind of warriors they had been. And through that connection, across the gulf of centuries, they would be remembered. The siege continued. The walls still stood. The Emperor still sat upon his golden throne, holding back the darkness with the sheer force of his will. And in the hearts of the defenders, something endured that no bombardment could destroy, no corruption could taint: hope. Small and fragile, easily extinguished, but still burning. Sleep now, if you can. Let the sound of these words carry you away from the troubles of your own day, to a time when the troubles were greater but the courage was greater still. Dream of warriors who stood against the night because standing was what they were made to do. Dream of sacrifices freely given, of brothers who died so that others might live, of walls that bent but did not break. The siege has only begun. There are darker days to come, and brighter ones. Heroes will fall and legends will be born. The fate of humanity itself hangs in the balance. But that is a story for another night. For now, rest. The walls still hold. Until next time.